All
There
right.
you go, Madam Chair.
Thank you. 10:01. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everybody. So I will call to order the OSBA Executive Team Committee meeting at 10:01. So our first point of business is to approve the agenda. So do I hear a motion to approve the agenda for this morning's meeting?
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
And second,
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, hearing and seeing none, the agenda is approved. So we'll move on to our first item under 3A as Board of Directors meeting attendance. So I'll start with some comments. We did send out the email a few weeks ago regarding attendance. I did get some quick email responses from a couple of board members, and they did bring up something that should be considered for planning for next year. And the concern was particularly around the scheduling of the June meeting there. And I know that this is a really busy time for all of us with graduations, it's a Father's Day. And so I think there just needs to be some more thought and planning for next year, that there could be potential conflicts with meeting was it the second or third weekend of June. We now have Juneteenth, so there's a lot of things to consider, but I know that there's conflicts. And so I'll just share that. I am planning to have a discussion with a couple of board members who their attendance issues are really problematic for me. As a president, I want to address those and talk to them directly. And then I'll follow up with Jim. But I think for the most part, there have been the response was maybe more consideration around holidays and planning meetings in the future. And my thought was I understood, and I understood their concerns. But I did say, you have a year to plan, the dates are scheduled in advance. Generally our meetings aren't, they're a couple of hours straight, like 9 to 12, 9 to 1. A lot of them are virtual. And so just to do their best, and we understand when things happen and there are conflicts. But we're talking about egregious absences where there's a lot of absenteeism, where they're missing really important decisions that are made. They're not providing their input. My concerns that there's particular regions, there's actually 2 regions where there's a lot of absences. And so I think that also slows down our work because we're not getting their perspective. And they're also holding that place for someone who may have more capacity. So in all fairness, I want there just to be some more thought about, can I commit to the commitment of being on the board, the time commitment, the schedule? It's really important. This role is really important. I feel it's very important. I've never missed a meeting, just putting that out there. I have no life. So those are my thoughts. I think attendance is incredibly important, particularly at the state level. Scott, you have your hand up.
yeah, thank you, Madam President. As you and I have discussed, I've had similar conversations. I know there's at least one board member that has had some ongoing attendance issues, even during my tenure. So I am supportive of your outreach. And I think particularly to your June board meeting comments, I think those are spot on, right? I just note that it is tough to kind of shoehorn these in, particularly around some of the holidays. But I think those of us that have a longer tenure on the board may recall, I mean, typically the June board meeting was actually like a 3-day, very intense retreat session. And I'll be honest, it typically spanned Father's Day, right? I can distinctly remember having a couple of Father's Day events at Glen Eden Beach or whatever it was with the fam. But I think that, to your point, Sonia, I think being respectful of everyone's time and energy, working from home, isn't it beautiful? But I concur with your comments about just trying to hey, this is a commitment, you're making this, it's scheduled a year out in advance. And I think, again, noting that over my tenure on the board, OSBA's tried to even be further thoughtful and more efficient with its meetings to try to minimize impact on some of those personal activities. But that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I do have a teenager that just woke up. Sorry. I'll be done at 11 of teenagers. Any other comments?
I would just add, Madam President, we have recognized some of the challenges with June. Because like Scott's right, we used to do what I would call our big board retreat in June, and we heard from a number of folks, given graduations, given Father's Day, can we not do that? That's why we've, in the last couple of years, Jane, you'd have to remind me for sure, but it's been the last couple of years in which we switched that longer board meeting to our September date. I mean, the problem is, we're all busy people. I mean, trying to find a weekend when we can get everybody together, it's playing calendar wars, but we will be cognizant of the concerns and try to look for a date in June that, you know, we will try to avoid Father's Day, because that was always a complaint from my family too. I'll be honest with you, Dad, we have to go to an OSBA board meeting on Father's Day. So we will be cognizant of it and keep it in our back of our minds as we're scheduling these. But I think we were cognizant of that in changing our bigger board meeting to September, which actually puts a little bit more onus on the staff, because we're also trying to get ready for convention and fall regionals at that time. But we recognize the need to get the board together, and we will be cognizant of that moving forward in June.
Well, I appreciate all the efforts, and folks, I know there's been a lot of focus on June. I think maybe that was the timeliness of the email. But you know, and the longer context of this is I'm talking about year long. You know, we have meetings scheduled all year long. We have absences at every time of the year. You know, I think that there's an opportunity to be a little bit more to look at solutions to the conflicts with holidays, but we're talking in terms of over the course of a year, there's just this pattern of absenteeism that's problematic. And it's not around holidays. It's also the responsiveness to emails, and Jane attested to that. That really, there's no fault line there. People need to be responsive. This is a leadership role at the state level. They need to be responsive to emails. They also need to look at their calendar and make those decisions and see if this is a commitment they can commit to. So you know, the focus on that email was not just about 1 month. It's really about the year-long commitment. And we're just saying, what I'm seeing is a trend of people just not attending. And you know, everybody has a busy life. Everybody on this team has a busy life. So we all need to make those decisions. And so I want to have a healthy discussion, continue that, because I think that as we've talked about, I think we anticipate a pretty large absent rate of people not being there on Saturday. A lot of folks will not be attending. And we have a lot of things on the agenda that are really important that we need to have everyone's input. And so I just think it's going to be something that will continue to needs to be addressed. Sammy.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts, not to labor our June meeting a lot, but I think there is an element here that I'm concerned about. The nature of it is June are going to be the time for critical decisions, as you mentioned, and end of year. So you can't really let that meeting go. And also you can't count on who will show up. You really might want to make sure any decisions are made, especially critical decisions are made in a thoughtful way, and people, the whole board are there for it. But looking at the calendar, it's going to be the first week is graduations, the second week is graduations, the third week is either second or third is Father's Day, and then you have Juneteenth, and then you have the last week is 4th of July weekend or week, basically. And I think it's going to be really challenging. I don't know if we get to say to people, you're traveling to a place for a couple of days, it gets them to commit more than if we have a 2 hours or 3 hours meeting. So maybe that's worth investigating down the line for the next June, if we have any historical record, or maybe if we can interview people. But I'm really worried about how critical June is and how tricky it is to schedule it. One thing also I want to lean on both of you, Scott and Sonia, and for that matter, Jim, Bill, everybody, and is basically the attendance issue and the idea of making sure that we have institutional knowledge that continues to carry. I'm worried about it, and I don't know if I'm seeing something that I should be worried about more than we have seen in the past, or is this the nature of it? So now I think we have 3 or 4 board members leaving the board, and making sure we maintain the institutional knowledge as we get new board members. I think that's even more critical, and I don't know how we can communicate that with the board and with folks who might have commitments that's their attendance is more critical because of that element. We're going to have lots of new people, relatively speaking, and I'm not sure if this is different than the past, where it should cause us to be even more paying attention.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sammy. Thank you. Scott, you had a comment or question?
Yes, sorry, Madam President. I had maybe just a quick point of clarification. You had mentioned that there was going to be a large absenteeism rate. If you don't mind me asking, how many have indicated they will not be at the meeting this Saturday?
As far as I know, I guess 2 or 3 that will not be attending.
Okay. And I guess maybe real quick to follow up on Sammy's point, I think the board dynamic has shifted so much, I'll just use pre-COVID to post-COVID, right? With the notion of historically where we, again, would have met in a June retreat, right? For 2 or 3 days. Those are very vividly seared into my brain, right? Facilitated goal setting sessions, strategic sessions. And it was just kind of different, right? The dynamic of the board is very different now versus then. So I can't really speak, Sammy, to your point about whether it would incentivize people to come back if there was a 3-day board retreat that was similar to what we're going to be doing in September. I can't speak to the fact of whether that would incentivize folks to come together or not, but I think your question is valid. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a valid point, but I also feel like, we have an accessibility that a lot of organizations may not have. We've continued to do work through COVID because we have access to technology and can have virtual meetings and have statewide memberships come together and have facilitators come in. So I feel like that Jim and his team have certainly made an ease of entry to participate. It's just really, we have a calendar that's published ahead of time. We have resources. There's a lot of resources, and it's a really ease of entry. I mean, we need people to check their calendars and make accommodations. So I don't think it's a big ask. And I think that when you get to the state level, if you agree to be a representative of your region, then I think that comes with the responsibility of making time to participate. I just think it's a really important thing. I don't think that we need to push, fall backwards and over accommodate. I think that, if you're going to step up to this, you should make some concessions and make time on your calendar. Sammy.
Madam President, to see what's next for this conversation, especially if it's brought up or deliberated in the next meeting or anytime in the future, I think we might want to ask the board or even the governance committee to get, in addition to the points that you mentioned, which are all valid and in place, is that what is the threshold at which we want to have a parallel to our local school board policies? You're absent for 2 months with excuse, or without excuse, or 4 months with excuse. I think that's the standard policy that many of us have. What is the parallel to it on OSBA board level? Because I think on the spectrum of people who might not be showing up, I might miss a calendar and I don't show up, and then I show up to the next one, versus I might be missing a couple of things because I have family commitments, versus I showed up to a couple meetings the whole year. And for the board to understand what you're talking about and what kind of threshold, maybe we want to, I don't want to say punitive, but we want to have a corrective action to maintain representation, might be a good conversation that people need to be aware of. And maybe we need to start the governance or policy. I'm not sure who start doing some surveying or listening about, hey, should we do that? And what should be the limit?
Well, this is where hopefully that Jim will weigh in. I think the letter kind of precipitated my intent is that I will convene I believe it's the governance committee to look at what our threshold is. I think we have some pretty good examples. If you look at if you look at the last 3 years, you look at the attendance and you look at folks that have been on the board, they were re-upped for a second term and their pattern has continued. And so from analyzing that data, we should be able to come up with either some type of, and this is not about being punitive. This is about, the trends triggering a conversation, having something in policy that says, if you have not met this number of meetings, if you have this issue with not being responsive, whatever that language or whatever that that threshold is, we need to come up with something. There needs to be a conversation, and then if there's no response to a consult, because I've reached out to people who have not even responded, then there needs to be a conversation. If you can't respond to the president to address absenteeism, then obviously there needs to be a conversation. May not be the right space. So I'd love for Jim to weigh in. I think this is something that either, I can't recall, Jim, if you said that Mary would be involved in this, or this is something that I could convene the governance. I think it's the governance committee to
It
look
would
at
be the
this.
governance or the policy committee, Madam President, because
Okay.
on a historical perspective, and Scott, this may even predate your time on the board. Previously, the OSBA board had very similar language to what's in statute regarding school board meetings, and an elected school board member or an appointed school board member missing so many meetings within a calendar year, the board can remove that person. That was very similar language, and that was actually done at OSBA. There was a board member out of the Lane County region who just stopped responding, stopped attending, and that's how we got Sherry Durst-Higgins actually back up on the board. The board voted to remove that person, and Sherry applied. Currently, our bylaws say the board of directors, by I believe it's a 2/3 vote,
2/3.
may remove members for good cause. So I think, Madam Chair, the opportunity to bring either the governance committee and or the policy committee together to define what that may mean and have the conversation around that is something we can definitely do over the course of this next year. Because we used to have language that mirrored exactly what was in school board, and the board felt that they wanted actually broader powers to remove a member during
Yeah.
discussion of the bylaws. So, you know,
Yeah, that's
we're
not
happy
really.
to convene. We're happy to convene the governance committee, and then, you know, whether you wanted to be I would suggest that it be in policy, but that'll be some work that we would have to do through the governance committee, which Mary has indicated she would be willing to help out with.
Okay. So yeah, and I since I'm addressing this, and this is almost like become part of my platform, I would like to see movement on this. So if we could look at convening the governance committee, I'd say within the next 2 months, to work on crafting whatever the language, policy, something that we can present to this
Sure.
team and then to the board. I think it's important that we move forward on it, because if I've addressed it in an email and I've responded with board members, and I think we need to have something tentative, something that's
We could definitely bring something back to the September board meeting for the board to get in the interim. We will work with Mary to see if we can get the exec or the governance committee, but you know, maybe if we can't get the governance committee together, we just kick them off for good cause anyway. So
just kick.
that was a joke, people. It's Monday.
It's not trucking.
Up a little bit.
I haven't had enough coffee. Sorry. Okay.
All right.
Not funny. Okay, so any other comments on that? We can move on to something else. I hate being bad cop. Okay, so we'll move on to 3B, the board self-evaluation tool. So I believe my last time I looked or touched on the evaluation tools when I sent the communication to Mary, and we had an executive team meeting, had made some adjustments and asked for Mary to make some amendments to the documents. Where are we on that, Jim? Because I don't know if I've seen it.
I believe she's made the amendments to the document, and the idea was for it to go out to the board, and happy to bring it back to you guys and email it and just get sign off on it. To have that as part of the September board meeting, so that it would go out during the interim between now and the September board meeting, so that we would have it for the September board meeting as the board self-evaluation, to have it as part of that discussion. I'll double check and make sure I got it back from Mary, but I think I did, and that may be my dropping it and not sending it back out. But I think she did get the comments and was making changes, and I'll just have to look and make sure I've got it.
Okay, well, I'll open the floor for questions, and then I have a question. Scott, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I guess a question maybe for you, Sonia, and Jim, just acknowledging that, given the timing of it, noting that I think, Sonia, as you started this conversation off, we have several existing OSBA board members who unfortunately are going to be stepping off the board. I would say our esteemed treasurer being one of them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to sort of engage with those board members that are also stepping off to ensure that we're capturing their comments in that self-evaluation process. Knowing Lori Theros, obviously Patty
Patty.
Doris and Bill, the three that are most closely resonating with off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
thank
can
you.
definitely get that out to them and get the feedback, even if they're not a board member. I think it's good given their
Their history.
especially Lori's and Patty's and Bill's history serving on the board. We can definitely get that from them. I think it'll be helpful feedback in order to get that, because let's say we get a brand new Marion Region board member to replace Bill. They won't have the background or knowledge. They may be able to fill out part of it, but it would better to have that depth of knowledge that Bill holds, having served on the board. So we will make sure that Lori gets it. We will make sure Bill gets it. We'll make sure Patty may still be staying on our board. So due to an appointment to the High Desert ESD, I will mention to you that Lori Theros is one of the board members that is not coming to the June board meeting, which I feel kind of uncomfortable with, because she said, I'm not going to be a board member anymore. Why would I come to the June board meeting? So, but we will definitely make sure they get those, and we'll get the feedback for them, Scott.
Thanks for bringing that up, Scott. That's important. And that's something we'll talk about later. I have an idea about something, an exit interview perhaps for board members, but I won't waste our time. It's not on the agenda. I did want to ask, when do you anticipate that will go out? Because again, with participation, I'd love to see more than 70% participation on the board.
Well, I think there's going to be a couple of times that I'll make notice of it in my weekly update to the board, and then probably send it out in August for return, because July will be a period of time, and July is awfully hard because of vacations and a variety of things. August, once we're getting a little bit closer, and then I'll just remind folks, and then as Linnell, because Jane only has 19, 20, I don't know. She knows how many days.
You're counting the days.
Jane probably knows the hours.
She probably has a clock going on her computer.
Don't make me sad.
Linnell and I will keep track of who has and who has not responded.
Okay.
And then we'll let you know, Madam President, so that if there are 3, 4, 5, we can double and triple team them to get the response back.
Okay. All right.
And again, it's not a long survey.
Yeah.
It really should take 15 minutes at the most in order to complete.
Great. That's pretty good compared to my evaluation at the state, my local one. That took some time. So any comments on the self-evaluation? I had another question. Oh, what was my question? Oh, I was going to ask about if you know, Jim, offhand, what the rate of responses to that. Just curious. 40%, 50%, 20%.
Well, the last time we did a board self-evaluation, which I believe was 3 years ago, we had about 75 to 80% return.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. Okay.
Well, we tell them they don't get fed unless they turn it in if they come to the September meeting. So.
Does that work? Okay. Okay. I might need to use that for something else. Okay. Okay.
We won't bring candy and snacks. How's that if you don't respond?
All right. So any questions on that one? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3C, succession plan subcommittee. So I'm going to have Sammy share.
Yeah.
Sammy.
Yeah, so I have an update for you all, and Jim and Dave as well. Feel free to stick around for this one as well. Basically, Chris and Mary and I would like to ask you, and I think we went ahead already, canceled the specific meeting about this topic in June, since it's going to overlap with Juneteenth, and we do have some update that I can share with you right now, but not really a thorough one. The updates that we have is that we have a clear 3 dimensions or 3 legs of the work that Mary is going to assist us with. And I have to just give her kudos to really taking the leadership on helping us out, doing lots of the legwork and the details. But the three dimensions I want to share with you and ask you if you have any feedback or questions or things that you think may not fall under these three, to share your feedback, and I can get that back to the committee. And hopefully we'll get more details to you in the July succession planning meeting. The three dimensions at a high level is that Mary and Chris and I will provide you a recommendation, which possibly could evolve into a recommendation to the full board before it became actionable, unless there's things that are recommendations from the committee directly to staff. And these are the three things. Number one, drafting guideline to outline the steps of business continuity while the ED is on the job, but for any unfortunate situation, they might not be responsive and incapacitated, sick, etc. Sorry, Jim, hypothetical, God forbid. But that's one of the things that the committee or subcommittee thinks that we should be outlining what kind of decision making and what kind of questions should be there that we should be thinking of in a situation like this, where the ED continues to be the leader of the organization, but there is need to be for a day-to-day work that the ED cannot do for some reason. Number two is the question around is there any guidebook or process or guideline to hiring the executive director in such a case that becomes a vacancy? And if that's the case, what kind of considerations that the committee or the executive committee or the full board needs to do, and what kind of best practices are there? So that will be the second dimension we will be looking at. The third one, it's really probably part of the professional development oversight and support of the ED, which is how are we developing the leadership from within the organization, developing succession planning within staffing. So basically what kind of skills the executive director is developing within the organization, whether that is the DED or the leadership team. So that might be another dimension that Mary is advocating for us to look at, and not necessarily there will be any or lots of work on it from the board, but it is a consideration, part of the larger conversation, which is the business continuity of the organization from in terms of continuing to do the work. So these are the three dimensions. Let's repeat them quickly. Temporary business continuity, succession in terms of hiring in such a case happens, and the third one, supporting institutional business continuity from staff skills. Any questions, comments, or more importantly, thoughts about something that you might be missing? Jim?
Yeah, sorry, Sammy. The only question I have under, I think those are great, and happy to work with Mary and the committee on these. Under number 2, which is hiring for the ED vacancy, did you guys talk about an interim process or a full hire process, or was it kind of both in conjunction, you know, like you do at your superintendency level?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you asked this question. So this is one of the sub bullet points there, which is what makes the board decide to go for an acting versus interim versus permanent, and what kind of considerations they should be looking at depending on when that vacancy happens, how much of a heads up we know about that vacancy occurring, and any other considerations, basically. So definitely that's one of the top things on mind for that dimension. I'm glad you mentioned it. Anything else, Jim? All right.
No, I don't think so, Sammy. Obviously, working with the succession committee and Mary, there'll probably be things that come up, but happy to be part of it and help out in any way.
All right, looks like Scott has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I guess, Sam, I was just going to say thank you. I appreciate your coordination with Mary. I have high respect for Mary and her skill set in that sense, governance, policy, and just very process oriented approach to things. So I appreciate you taking the lead on that. And
Yeah, thank you. And just want to highlight also with assistance from Mary, we're reaching out to best practices from other nonprofits,
Okay.
similar associations, or even people who might have a good a similar experience. And I really look forward to bringing you some solid recommendations in the coming months.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that too. I think these three different scenarios are really great. I think the way that you frame number one, it seems like that would be more of an emergency response, right? Was that
Yeah.
okay? Like an emergency plan if something does happen, you know, if anything happens, it's unfortunate that we would need to quickly enact and replace leadership or have someone placed in leadership. So that's just my thought, that maybe reframing that one a little bit. But I think these are great. I love the idea of looking at like-minded organizations and looking at how they frame or construct their contingency succession planning. I think it's really important work that we're doing, and I think it's great to have Mary on board doing that too. She brings a great skill set. One thing I wanted, well, actually, Mary was Mary part of the process of the last round, Jim? Was she part of that? No. Okay. So she
No,
wouldn't
and
bring
that's
it. She wouldn't bring any
what I
knowledge
was
of that.
probably looking for a document. There's a piece of paper here with Melissa Ullum's contact. Melissa did the search for when I applied for it.
Yeah.
So, and I think I had mentioned it to Mary when we spoke last that she may want to reach out to Melissa. She is she operates a search firm that does headhunting for executive type positions. She's the one who contracted to do the search when I applied. We also used her when we hired Melissa Goff and now Emily. She may have best practices as well. And I was looking for the document. Sorry, I couldn't find it right away. But I'll make sure I get Melissa Ullum's contact information to Mary as well. Because she may have, if you don't use her, that's fine. But she probably has some best practices ideas around headhunting for executive type positions.
I think
Yeah,
one thing I wanted to say is that I know that the last front, the process, board members were involved, and I know that Scott was involved in that. Maybe, and this will probably be the work that Mary would do. I was already thinking of is maybe perhaps getting their perspective on the experience. Kind of doing like a focus group or interview. So if she's able to connect with folks who are part of that process of bringing Jim on board, getting their context, that can also be part of the work too. So just something to share. Sammy, I'm sure you guys have probably already thought of that. So
I'm gonna write it down, make sure maybe we can look into that deeper. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Jim, when were you hired for that position? Like 7 years ago?
It'll be coming up on 6, I believe.
6 years. Yeah.
Yeah, 6 years. So, yeah, and there was a whole process of they went to the board. I know Melissa went to the board and asked the board, what are the kind of like what you do with a soup search with your soup search firm. What are the qualifications and things you're looking for? And then there was a search committee that I believe Doug Nelson and Mr. Crumbine from Pendleton. Now we're going way into the Wayback Machine, although not that far back, helped create, but the board had the ability to look at qualifications and what they wanted within an executive director, and then a search committee. And then Melissa Ullum worked with an interview committee to go through the process. It was a drawn out process, but I thought it was a good process because you had the board had at the time a national search, and you had a number of candidates from across the nation put in. So
nice. Yeah, this is great.
I think the other thing that, and this might be in the weeds, but I think that always whenever you are planning, particularly when you're looking at succession and you're looking at the vacancy, maybe having a template or a draft position description. I don't know how much Jim's role has changed in the last 6 years, but having something that's up to date and reflective of, in 30 days, God forbid something happens, we have a position description, or in a year, just to have a template. So you know that that person's coming in, they're aware of the expectations or roles and responsibilities. It's just good practice to have that on hand. So And I'm sure Mary's probably thought of that too, but I wanted just to make sure that you all know that should be part of, that should be either a resource or something that's particularly for number 2, I think, that you should have something drafted or updated.
I agree. Honestly, and now this is might be a little bit branching off. Well, this is within the same topic, but I would say Sonia and the rest of the team. I think this is important, and usually when this happens, you open up the job description or refurbish it and look at it, and not just to speculate what's Jim's plans for the summer, especially if we're going to have any surprise legislative sessions. The question is, should we have a parallel process independent of the succession planning discussion to look at the job description and update it every couple of years? And maybe this is time now for us to start looking at it regardless of the timeline. Sorry, Jim, I'm putting something.
No. I think it has not been updated since I was hired. I'll be honest with you.
It needs to be
has not been
updated.
updated since I was hired.
Yeah.
And what I would suggest is let me get that to Mary Paulson. And have Mary look at it. And then what we do within OSBA when we are redoing position descriptions, we have a contract with a group here in Salem called Cascade Employers Association to look at it for the legal stuff that needs to be in a position description. And then I would suggest we may engage Melissa Ullum with and have her work with Mary on, how does this look in light of the field that's out there so that you have a position description. Obviously, I would have input as well because things have changed a little bit in 6 years.
I was going to say it's probably not the same position.
But I think, Sammy, that's a good thought, and I'm happy to get Mary working on that as well.
Yes, and honestly, I think the independence of the succession planning, this is great timing for it as we get a new deputy executive director to really have clarity on roles and also clarity on what are there things on your job description that may have been by practice delegated to executive team and to the DED, and you practice the oversight or overall decision making, and which ones are more day-to-day for you. So the fluidity on how the job description may have evolved and documenting that as we are right now might really help you as you delegate and work with Melissa on her new role. At the same time, it will help us get us readier as a board in such a case where we need to brush up that job description for a search.
Yeah, I would liken this to like when I practiced law, when I did estate planning. You're going through grief and stuff. You just want to hand a notebook to somebody and say, here's the plan.
Here's the plan.
Here's what you do. So that's something we can definitely be working on, that if and when I decide I'm going to leave OSBA or I get hit by the train trying to cross 12th Street out here, there's a notebook to give to you guys. I agree. That's continuity planning at a very good level. So I don't want to go hit by a train, but I'll tell you what, you're going to go like that. Rather go like that than hang around, man.
Oh no. Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
All right.
That's all for me.
Thank you, Sammy. All right, great. Any other comments on that succession planning? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to item 3D, ESG investing. So Jim, I'll have you make some comments regarding that.
Yeah, Chris Davidson has been working some with Brent, and Brent's as you know, Brent's our guy from DA Davidson, and working with the document that Bill prepared with regard to investment policies. And I know Chris and Brent have been talking about what does this look like on a going forward basis? Do we use a hybrid model? Do we use a lens going forward so that we're not saying, hey, you've got to drop this particular investment, as opposed to, and I liken it to an equity lens where you're asking questions about, does this help fulfill the mission of the association? Does it in any way violate the working agreements of the board and or like the caucus bylaws, or if we get to an LGBTQ caucus, their bylaws in any way I know that Chris and Brent are meeting, I want to say I'm trying to count back my days. It's next week that Chris and Brent and I have a phone call set up to go over this and come up with some suggestions. Brent has several institutional investors that are higher educational in nature that give out scholarships and a variety of things, and they have very varying degrees at which they look at this with regard to assuring that they have the capital they need in order to grant the scholarships or whatever it is they're doing, but don't use a hard and fast policy, but use more of a lens. So we are going to be meeting with Brent next week in order to begin this discussion. We will be using Bill's document that he prepared for the finance committee and the board to take a look at as kind of our stepping on or stepping off point, along with some of the ESG. But, you know, I agree with some of the comments that Brent had when we got together as a finance. I don't know how you give a petroleum-based company a high ESG when it all depends on how you weight environmental versus social versus governance. But I think there are things that we can and should be aware of with regard to our investments and making sure that we are not investing in products or companies that have a track record of violating civil rights, I think is a big one, and or products that we wouldn't allow in our public school setting, i.e. firearms and things like that. So I think there's a lens approach we're looking at, which we would then use as an approach for the finance and our budget committee to look at with regard to that. But we are beginning that process again and using Bill's document that he prepared as our jumping off point for that. Because when I look at a variety of things with regard to ESG, and Brent and I've done some talking back and forth, it really comes down to a judgmental call as to whether, I mean, I don't know how you get a petroleum-based company to get high ESG. They may have really good social and governance, but their environmental stuff is, you know, so I think it's probably a lens approach that we would be looking at with regard to our portfolio on a moving forward basis. But we are meeting next week to kick that off, and Brent's going to bring us a variety of issues from some of his higher educational institution ones, and also some of his they're kind of like the Oregon Community Foundation, Sonia, in that they're philanthropic in that nature. So that's where we're going to go. And I just wanted to make sure Bill understands we are using his document as our basis for the discussions moving forward.
Sounds good. So I want to open the floor for any comments. Bill, would you like to say anything?
Oh,
before
no,
you drop
I
off?
just typed in the chat. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Have to drop in a minute, but just I like the part of my document that I appreciate, that I really thought about the most, was the ability for the board to have a say, you know, in the investment decision, you know, that is either a lens, or I tried to make it very clear just to get a starting point, but I knew it would evolve as time went on. So, but yeah, just having board engagement and having a length of time to allow the investor contractor to be able to manipulate funds without harming the OSBA finances was kind of the key component of my thought when I wrote that document.
Thanks, Bill. I wanted to check and make sure you're attending the meeting on Saturday, right,
Oh,
Bill?
I'm there. I'm
Okay.
planning on being there,
Okay, great.
unless I walk in front of that train. Right.
Okay, enough with the train. That's not funny. Okay, any other comments on that? Thank you, Bill, for that. And thank you. Your work's going to live on with this. I appreciate
All
your.
right. Sorry, I got to drop, but
Okay.
thanks for
Bye.
See you Saturday, Bill.
All right. Any other comments? Okay. Well, great. I'm glad that I think a lens is a really great option. I know what a lens is really just criteria and it's questions. So whenever you draft or come up with a template for a lens, is that something that will go first to the finance committee? Is that right? Okay.
Well, no, the finance committee referred it to you guys as the executive committee. So it will
Okay.
come to the executive committee and then go to the finance
Got it.
committee. But the idea was a smaller group to take a look at it and then make recommendations to the finance committee coming from the officers. That was the recommendation out of that committee.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay,
So I have a
Jamie?
brief comment.
Sure.
First of all, I think I like the approach of the lens. Also, I think we talked about this a little bit last time. There is this struggle between being very prescriptive and rigid with a number where you may miss the mark, but also the other end of the spectrum where you're not specific and then you leave it up to interpretation or even potentially conflict on the board in terms of what we think is a right investment or not based on our own perceptions or assessments and biases. That happens also with the equity lens. And I think that will be a really big challenge, not to throw in an anecdote, but think of the BSD boycott, sanction, divest movement. If someone might elevate that as a lens, not that I would be supportive of it, but I would mention that might be a point where it might bring people to be opposing on what they feel about it and how it relates. So being specific around, okay, we're specific about the kids, products that harms children, and that's where we're applying the lens and we're trusting who's making that assessment, whether it is the contractor or the executive director. I think the board should stick to developing the policy and the guidelines and not making decisions one-on-one. Like even investment companies, I don't think boards make decisions on investments. It's their Warren Buffett, the executive director who makes those decisions. So I think we need to be really clear on that, so we don't end up having debates about this company did that last week and on a board meeting.
No, I think the idea that we've talked about roughly, just to give you an example, and then we can continue conversations later, is the idea of preparing the list of those entities in which we hold either equities or bonds. And then if we are looking to move, I mean, if there are certain companies that we're just saying we're not going to invest in, then we don't invest in those companies. But if there are ones where we apply the lens to say, okay, Brent has approached us with regard to, we have a bond being called, we've got to reinvest those dollars. Here are the options that Brent gives us as investors. Then we would prepare for the board or the finance committee, depending on how it goes, how we interpreted the lens with regard to that investment action. And then, I mean, the board ultimately does get to say, I mean, ultimately the board could vote, we're not investing in X company. They could just say that, but there would be a process by which those that make the decisions, which is who's ever in the deputy role, myself and Chris, run through the lens and we say, given the options that Brent has given us, we believe that this meets OSBA's investment lens moving forward. And that's just done as we do those. We don't, early on when we created this investment fund 10 years ago, there were lots of decisions because there were lots of things that needed to go on. Now it's bonds being called, or, hey, I'm looking at, Brent will say, hey, I'm looking at this trend with regard to this company and earnings don't look great for the revenue that we want to generate. Here are some options I'm looking at. It's not onerous. It's not like we're doing hundreds of these in a month. There's maybe 3 in a month. And we should be able to justify the actions of, we moved to this bond, or we sold this equity to move to this equity, and run it through a lens where we prepare a memo to the board. This is what we've done and why we've done it, or to the finance committee, either way. But it's not, in talking with Brent, we're not day traders where we're making those purchases on a regular basis. So
that's good.
Yeah, that clarified things for me. Thanks. Scott, did you have any thoughts or questions?
No, I'm tracking the same, and I appreciate the conversation. And again, I know Bill has since stepped off But again, I'm appreciative of him bringing this concept forward, and I like where it's going. Again, as noted during the last, I think, finance or the budget committee, I was supportive, but just had some reservations about the ability to really, what are some of the clarifications and how do we kind of move this, these goals forward, which I'm supportive of without negatively impacting a long-term earning potential of OSBA, because we know that's crucial for us to provide these services to our member districts. So I think it is a line that we'll need to walk, but I appreciate the work that Bill's done, and I like to see where it goes from here.
Great. All right, great. So looking forward to that. So just before we adjourn, I know, well, Bill's already gone, but I wanted just to express my appreciation to Jane. I think this will be her last executive team meeting with us. I'm gonna have to sneak up to Salem and have coffee with you or something, Jane, to make that happen.
I would like that. That would be
Okay.
nice.
Gonna
Yeah,
miss you.
thank you.
Linnell's great, but I'm gonna miss you.
Same, Jane.
Lots
Thank
of
you,
love to
guys.
Jane. We'll have to get some support for Jim. I think it'll be tough. You know, Linnell's amazing though. Linnell, we're happy to have you on board. Just saying.
Here's the interesting thing that many of you don't know. We have done disc profiles, and some of you participated in that a couple of years ago. It's a process where you look at how does somebody receive information and how does somebody communicate and how do they like to receive communication.
Yep.
Jane and I are the exact opposite. Linnell, Emily Nischik, and I are exactly the same. I mean, it is, and Sydney, who helps do these for us, goes, we may have to have some conversations about this. But Jane is the exact mirror of mine, and I think that's why we've worked so well over so many years. But Jane will be with us on Saturday, so
Yay. Yep, I'll see you in person. All right. Well, and with no other comments or questions, we are adjourned. I'm gonna hang on and chat with Jim afterwards, but I'll see everybody on Saturday on Zoom.
and now I've got it on my calendar. I don't know if it's on your calendars. Coffee with the executive committee before the board meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
It's there.
Just making sure.
Yep. Coffee. Yes. Coffee. Yes. I'll definitely have coffee. Certainly.
All
right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye. All right. We're not recording, right?
I
No,
will
we're
stop now. Stop recording.